Daniel Robinson. On June 23, 2021, 24-year-old geologist Daniel Robinson drove away from his work site in Buckeye, Arizona, heading west into the desert around 9:45 a.m. A co-worker watched him leave. That was the last confirmed sighting of the young man who had been born without his lower right arm, but never let it define his limitations. Robinson had moved to Phoenix in 2019 after graduating from the College of Charleston in South Carolina, ready to build his career in geology. His father, David Robinson, described him as independent and driven, someone who had overcome challenges his entire life with quiet determination. Friends knew him as someone who approached life with remarkable resilience, never allowing his physical difference to hold him back from pursuing his dreams in a demanding field. When Robinson didn't return home that evening, concern quickly mounted among his family and coworkers. His employer reported him missing the same day, initiating a search that would soon reveal deeply troubling inconsistencies. But it would be nearly a month before investigators found his vehicle, and when they did, nothing about the scene made sense to those who examined it carefully. On July 19, 2021, Robinson's 2017 Jeep Renegade was discovered overturned in a ravine. The airbags had deployed, and Robinson's personal belongings remained inside, including items that suggested he had been wearing his seatbelt at the time of impact. Yet Robinson himself was nowhere to be found. The vehicle appeared to have been there for some time, but the circumstances of how it ended up in that location raised immediate red flags for investigators. The details surrounding the vehicle's discovery raised immediate questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. A rancher who had searched the same area on July 17th reported seeing no vehicle, creating a 2-day gap that investigators struggled to explain. Even more puzzling, the Jeep's data system showed the ignition had been turned on and off 46 times after the crash, and the vehicle had been driven an additional 11 miles beyond where it was eventually discovered. This data suggested someone had been operating the vehicle well after any crash scenario would have left it immobile. Red paint transfer on Robinson's Jeep suggested involvement with another vehicle, though no matching vehicle was ever located despite extensive searches of the area. These anomalies led private investigator Jeff McGrath, hired by the Robinson family after growing frustrated with the official investigation, to conclude that the crash scene had been staged. McGrath pointed to the impossibility of the vehicle's data matching an accidental scenario. Adding to the mystery, Robinson's apartment was ransacked after his disappearance, and someone accessed his laptop during that time. The motive for the break-in remains unknown, as does the identity of who might have been responsible. Nothing of obvious value was reported stolen, leading to speculation that someone was looking for specific information rather than conducting a typical burglary. In the weeks before he vanished, Robinson had been texting a woman who later told investigators she felt uncomfortable with his unannounced visits to her residence. This detail led some to speculate about his state of mind, though friends adamantly denied that Robinson exhibited any behavior consistent with self-harm. Some wondered if he might have been experiencing a mental health episode that day in the desert, though no evidence supported this theory beyond speculation. The Buckeye Police Department ruled out foul play early in their investigation, a conclusion that David Robinson has publicly disputed in numerous media appearances. He has criticized what he sees as discrepancies in co-worker statements and insufficient investigative effort, noting that the family's own searches have yielded more concrete information than official channels. David Robinson, a military veteran, has spent countless hours in the Arizona desert searching for any trace of his son. Human remains discovered in the area in both July and November 2021 were tested but confirmed not to be Robinson's, providing brief hope followed by crushing disappointment each time. As of June 2025, 4 years after his disappearance, no suspects have been named and no charges filed. But mysteries in remote deserts aren't the only places people vanish without explanation. Summer Wells. The rural hills of Rogersville, Tennessee, seemed an unlikely place for a child to disappear without a trace. The Wells family lived on a remote property, surrounded by wilderness, but also by the security that comes from knowing your land. Yet on June 15, 2021, Summer Wells vanished from her own home, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a family forever changed by a few unexplained minutes. That morning had been ordinary enough by all accounts. Summer's mother, Candace Bly, took her own mother to the hospital for a routine appointment, then visited friends in the area. The group decided to go swimming at Warriors Path State Park, with Summer and a family friend enjoying the water on what seemed like a perfect summer day. They returned to the Wells' remote property in the late afternoon, with Summer appearing happy and energetic, according to those present. After arriving home, Candace and Summer planted flowers together in the yard, a simple activity that would later be remembered as their last shared moment. Summer then went down to the basement to play, while Candace helped her mother, Candy, for what she described as a brief period between 2 and 5 minutes. The basement wasn't far from where Candace was working, and she had no reason to believe anything was wrong in such a short span of time. When Candace went to check on Summer around 6:30 p.m., the young girl was gone. The 911 call came quickly after a frantic search of the immediate property. Candace searched the property before contacting authorities, calling out for Summer and checking all the places a young child might hide or play. But Summer had seemingly vanished into the surrounding wilderness without leaving any trace. A neighbor reported hearing a shrill scream around the time of Summer's disappearance, though the source was never determined, and the sound could have come from any number of sources in the rural area. Despite the family having dogs on the property that would typically bark at strangers, investigators found no footprints or physical evidence of abduction. The dogs tracked Summer's scent, but the trail went cold without providing clear direction about which way she might have gone. Extensive searches covered 2,400 acres of the rugged Tennessee terrain, with volunteers and professional search teams combing through dense forest and difficult geography. Yet searchers found no trace of the young girl despite days of intensive effort. In July 2021, just weeks after Summer vanished, her older brothers were removed from the home and placed in custody for their safety, a decision that suggested authorities had concerns about the family environment. That October, Dawn Wells was arrested for driving under the influence, adding another layer of scrutiny to a family already under intense public examination. The family's troubles became fodder for online speculation and true crime discussions. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent Leslie Earhart noted the unusual nature of the case, stating, "We typically would have found a child at this stage." The lack of any physical evidence, combined with the remote location and the short time frame of Summer's disappearance, left investigators with few leads to pursue. The terrain itself presented challenges, with numerous places where evidence could be hidden or simply overlooked despite thorough searches. Authorities sought to speak with the driver of a red Toyota Tacoma seen in the area around the time of Summer's disappearance, hoping they might have witnessed something relevant, but no suspects have been publicly named. Candace has maintained her belief about what happened, saying, "I feel in my heart that somebody has came up here and took her." Dawn Wells has echoed this sentiment in various interviews, insisting that someone must have taken Summer during those brief minutes she was alone. Small-scale searches in 2022 yielded nothing new, and the case gradually faded from national headlines, though it remained a source of pain for the family and community. In August 2025, the TBI released an updated age progression photo, showing what Summer might look like now, hoping that someone might recognize her if she is still alive somewhere. A $73,000 reward remains offered for information, but 4 years later, the case remains unsolved, with Summer's whereabouts unknown and her family living with the unbearable weight of not knowing. What happened to a young girl playing in her own basement remains a mystery that haunts everyone who knew her. Dulce Maria Alaves. September 16, 2019 started as an ordinary afternoon at Bridgeton City Park in New Jersey. Families gathered at the playground. Children played on the swings and slides while parents watched from nearby, enjoying the mild weather and the simple pleasure of an afternoon outside. But in the span of just a few minutes, one child would vanish in broad daylight, sparking a search that continues to this day and raising questions about how someone can disappear from such a public place. Dulce Maria Alaves had gone to the park with her mother, Noema Alaves Perez, and younger brother that afternoon. The playful young girl headed to the swings while her mother stayed in a car about 30 yards away, helping her son with homework. The distance wasn't unusual for a parent at a playground, where children often want independence to play with other kids. Noema could see the playground area from where she sat, and the park was populated with other families who would presumably notice if something went wrong. When Noema looked up to check on the children, after focusing on the homework for several minutes, she saw her son alone and crying near the swings. Dulce was gone. The realization hit immediately that something was terribly wrong. Her son couldn't articulate clearly what had happened, but it was clear that his sister had vanished in the brief time Noema had been occupied with schoolwork. The response was immediate and extensive. Police arrived quickly and began searching the park and surrounding area. Searches combed through the nearby woods, checking every possible hiding place and calling out Dulce's name, but found no trace of the young girl. It was as if she had simply evaporated in those few unsupervised minutes at a public playground. Witnesses came forward with descriptions that would become central to the investigation. A light-skinned Hispanic male, approximately 5'8" tall, driving a red van. The descriptions were frustratingly general, fitting thousands of potential suspects, but they provided the only real lead investigators had to work with. The red van became a focal point of the investigation, with authorities seeking any security footage or witnesses who might have seen such a vehicle in the area. The case drew scrutiny not just toward potential suspects, but toward Noema herself, as often happens with parents present when children disappear. Public judgment came swift and harsh when she mentioned she had been scratching lottery tickets when girl went missing, though she asked people not to judge the family's circumstances. The statement sparked controversy, with some questioning her attentiveness that afternoon, and others defending her as a parent who had simply been doing homework with her son in a public place. In 2020, leads extended the investigation as far as Ohio, with investigators following up on reported sightings and tips from across state lines, though none proved fruitful. A false claim about Dulce's passing circulated online that year, causing additional distress to the family and temporarily derailing legitimate investigative efforts as authorities had to spend time and resources debunking the rumor. Age progression images released in 2021 showed what Dulce might look like as she grew older, keeping her face in the public consciousness and giving people a sense of who to look for as time passed. By 2023, investigators acknowledged they still had no strong suspects, despite years of dedicated work and thousands of tips called in from concerned citizens. The investigation took a technological turn in 2025 when authorities began using artificial intelligence in their searches, hoping that new tools might uncover patterns or connections that human investigators had missed in the massive amount of data collected over 6 years. The AI systems are being used to analyze tips, identify potential patterns, and cross-reference information in ways that would take human investigators years to accomplish manually. A reward of $75,000 has been offered for information leading to Dulce's location, one of the larger rewards in recent missing persons cases, reflecting the seriousness with which authorities are treating this investigation. Yet 6 years after that September afternoon, the playground remains empty of answers, and Dulce's whereabouts remain unknown. Her family continues to hope that somewhere, someone knows what happened to the young girl who vanished in broad daylight. From public spaces to lonely highways, the locations where people vanish vary widely. Bryce Lespisa. August 30, 2013, should have been the end of a long drive home for 19-year-old Bryce Lespisa. Instead, it marked the beginning of a disappearance that has baffled investigators, devastated his family, and spawned countless theories about what could have happened to a young man who seemed to have everything going for him. Bryce had been a popular student throughout his school years, artistic and athletic, an only child from Illinois who had been attending Sierra College in California. Those who knew him described someone talented and well-liked, someone who seemed to navigate life with relative ease. But on August 28th, something changed in a way that would alter the course of his life and leave his family searching for answers that may never come. He broke up with his girlfriend and left campus abruptly, planning to make the roughly 500-mile drive back to his parents' home. It should have been a straightforward journey along well-traveled California highways, a drive many college students make when they need the comfort of home. But the journey that should have taken several hours stretched into 2 days of increasingly strange behavior that would later be analyzed for any clue about his state of mind. The first sign of trouble came on August 29th, when Bryce ran out of gas in Buttonwillow, California, miles away from any logical route he should have been taking. When roadside assistance arrived, they found him unresponsive but physically fine, sitting in his vehicle in a way that concerned the attendant enough to note it in their report. Rather than continuing his journey after receiving gas, Bryce lingered in the area for hours, prompting multiple police welfare checks as his parents, growing increasingly worried, called authorities to check on their son. Officers who encountered Bryce during these welfare checks noted nothing that rose to the level of requiring intervention. He seemed tired and perhaps confused, but not in immediate danger or under the influence of anything obvious. They encouraged him to continue home, but had no legal basis to force him to do so. Each time officers left, Bryce remained in the area, his behavior inexplicable to everyone trying to understand what was happening. Early on August 30th, he called his mother, Karen, telling her he was tired and would be home soon. It would be their last conversation. Hours later, his SUV was found overturned near Castaic Lake, with blood on the windshield indicating he had struck his head during the crash, and his belongings still inside the vehicle. But Bryce had escaped through the back hatch and vanished into the surrounding wilderness. The crash scene investigation revealed puzzling details that didn't add up to a simple accident scenario. Despite the apparent violence of the rollover, with the vehicle sustaining significant damage, Bryce had clearly survived the initial impact and left under his own power. His phone, wallet, and laptop remained in the vehicle, along with personal items that suggested he hadn't planned to disappear permanently. Why would someone flee a crash scene leaving behind everything they would need to survive? Searches of Castaic Lake and the surrounding area found no trace of Bryce despite extensive efforts involving dive teams and ground searches. His mother Karen spoke of their close relationship, saying, "We always had a good, close relationship. I live with that permanent hole in my heart." She mentioned that in their last conversations before he left campus, Bryce seemed to want to tell them something, but couldn't find the words, leaving her to wonder forever what he might have been struggling with. In 2025, an age-progressed photo showed what Bryce might look like now, nearly 12 years older than the young man who drove away from college. A Facebook page dedicated to finding him continues to collect tips and keep his story alive, with his mother remaining active in sharing updates and maintaining hope. Theories about Bryce's fate range from accidental passing in the wilderness to voluntary disappearance to start a new life away from pressures he couldn't articulate to his family. His mother holds on to hope while living with uncertainty, never knowing what happened to her son after that strange August night when everything changed. But missing persons aren't the only cold cases that haunt communities. Kendrick Johnson. January 11, 2013, started as a normal school day at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. Students filed into classrooms, attended their morning classes, and looked forward to lunch and the end of another routine Friday. By the end of the day, it would become the scene of a disputed incident that continues to divide investigators, family members, and the community more than a decade later. Kendrick Johnson was an athletic student who played sports passionately and was known around school for his friendly demeanor and competitive spirit on the field. When he didn't return home that afternoon, his family's concern grew quickly into alarm. Something was wrong. They knew it instinctively, and their worst fears would be confirmed the next morning. His body was discovered inside a rolled gym mat, positioned upside down in a vertical position in a way that seemed incomprehensible to those who found him. The gym mats, stored vertically against a wall, had become a tomb for the young athlete in circumstances that would be debated for years to come. The initial investigation by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office concluded that Kendrick had reached into the mat to retrieve a shoe that had fallen inside and become trapped, unable to extract himself from the tight space. As he struggled, the theory went, he had slowly suffocated in an accidental incident. The official ruling, accidental passing by positional asphyxia. But Kendrick's family immediately disputed this conclusion, beginning a battle for answers that continues over a decade later and has become a cause célèbre for those who believe in systemic failures in the justice system. The family commissioned independent examinations, unwilling to accept the official narrative that their athletic son had somehow become fatally trapped in a gym mat. A second examination indicated blunt force trauma to the right side of Kendrick's neck, suggesting he had been struck before being placed in the mat. A third examination confirmed these findings, with the pathologist concluding the injuries were inconsistent with accidental positioning and pointing to evidence of a struggle or assault. Perhaps most disturbing to the family and their supporters, when Kendrick's body was exhumed for the second examination, his internal organs were missing, replaced with newspaper. This detail fueled theories of evidence tampering and added to the family's conviction that officials were hiding something or had mishandled the case so badly that evidence was lost. The funeral home blamed the state crime lab. The lab denied responsibility, and the truth about what happened to Kendrick's organs has never been fully explained. Kendrick's family believes 2 students were involved in his passing, stemming from a previous altercation that had occurred months earlier. They've also alleged that one student's father, an FBI agent, used his position to influence the investigation and protect his son from scrutiny. These accusations sparked allegations of both a cover-up and racial bias in how the case was handled, with many noting that Kendrick was black while the students the family suspects are white. The case was reopened in 2021 by Sheriff Ashley Polk, who stated, "If there's questions, I need to know the answers myself." Kendrick's mother, Jacqueline Johnson, expressed hope at the time. "It's been 8 long years. I'm feeling hopeful." The reopening seemed to offer a chance for fresh eyes and new technology to shed light on what really happened in that gymnasium. However, even after reopening with promises of thoroughness, the case remained unresolved. In 2025, the family filed an amended lawsuit challenging Kendrick's official record, continuing their fight for what they see as justice for their son and refusing to let the case fade from public consciousness despite years of frustration and setbacks. The search for answers doesn't always end in remote areas or empty buildings. Kyron Horman. June 4, 2010, began with excitement at Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. Students had prepared projects for the science fair. Parents walked the hallways admiring their children's work, and the building buzzed with the energy of proud families and enthusiastic young scientists. For one family, that morning would mark the last time they saw their son. Kyron Horman was a young student known for being shy and thoughtful, with a particular love for science that had led him to prepare carefully for the fair. He wore his glasses and a t-shirt featuring his favorite science topic, excited to show off what he had created. His stepmother, Terry Horman, accompanied him to school that morning, and a photo was taken of Kyron standing proudly in front of his project, a red tree frog display that represented weeks of preparation. Terry later told investigators she watched Kyron walk toward his classroom around 8:45 a.m., the last time anyone could definitively place him in the building. She left the school shortly afterward, beginning a timeline that would later be scrutinized minute by minute. When attendance was taken later that morning, Kyron's teacher marked him absent, noting what she believed was a scheduled appointment that would keep him out of class. But no such appointment existed. The school bus arrived at Kyron's stop that afternoon without him. The driver, expecting to see the young student, immediately notified the family when Kyron wasn't there to board. Within minutes, panic set in. Calls to the school revealed that Kyron had been marked absent all day. He had vanished somewhere between the science fair hallway and his classroom, a distance of perhaps 100 feet, in a building full of teachers, students, and parents. Massive searches ensued across the Portland area. Hundreds of volunteers combed through forests, parks, and neighborhoods surrounding the school, hoping to find any trace of the missing student. Search dogs tracked scents, helicopters scanned from above, and divers checked nearby bodies of water. Yet despite one of the largest search efforts in Oregon history, no physical evidence of Kyron was ever found. Suspicion quickly focused on Terry Horman, the last family member to see Kyron that morning. Her timeline after leaving the school came under intense scrutiny. She reported visiting various stores and running errands, but investigators found inconsistencies in her account. When she was asked to take polygraph tests, she reportedly failed multiple attempts, though polygraph results are not admissible in court, and their reliability is disputed. The investigation uncovered what investigators considered damning information. They alleged that months before Kyron's disappearance, Terry had attempted to hire a landscaper to eliminate her husband, Kane, Kyron's biological father. The landscaper had reportedly gone to police with this information. While this alleged plot had nothing directly to do with Kyron's disappearance, it painted a picture of someone capable of planning harm to family members. Terry's friend, Dee Dee Speicher, also drew investigative attention. Speicher was reportedly unaccounted for during crucial hours on the day Kyron disappeared, and investigators believed she might have information about what happened. Despite being called before a grand jury, Speicher maintained she knew nothing about Kyron's whereabouts and invoked her Fifth Amendment rights regarding certain questions. Kyron's biological mother, Desiree Young, has remained vocal in her belief that Terry knows what happened to her son. In interviews over the years, she has spoken about Kyron's personality and the unbearable pain of not knowing where he is. "Kyron is a quiet kid. He just has this great laugh," she said, her description capturing a young person frozen in time in his family's memory. Kane Horman, Kyron's father, divorced Terry and obtained a restraining order shortly after the disappearance. He has described in interviews the small details he misses: the glasses that he wore, the expressions on his face. The divorce proceedings revealed deep family tensions that had existed before Kyron vanished, adding layers of complexity to the investigation. Despite intensive investigation, no charges have ever been filed in connection with Kyron's disappearance. The case remains classified as an active criminal investigation rather than a missing persons case, indicating authorities believe foul play was involved. In 2025, Portland's district attorney renewed efforts to bring fresh perspectives to the case, meeting with Kyron's family to discuss potential new approaches. A $50,000 reward remains offered for information leading to Kyron's whereabouts or the resolution of the case. Small-scale searches were conducted in 2024 in areas that hadn't been thoroughly examined previously, though these yielded no new evidence. Age progression photos have been released showing what Kyron might look like as he grows older, though his family holds little hope he is still alive after 15 years. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Sometimes disappearances happen in places with extensive security measures. Brian Schaffer. April 1st, 2006, was a Saturday night near the Ohio State University campus in Columbus, and Brian Schaffer had every reason to celebrate. The medical student was on spring break, his exams had gone well, and he was planning a trip to Miami with his girlfriend. He decided to go out with his friend William Clint Florence to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar in a complex that would become central to one of the most baffling disappearances in modern times. Brian Randall Schaffer had been grieving his mother's recent passing from cancer, a loss that had affected him deeply but hadn't derailed his medical school ambitions. Those who knew him described an athletic, ambitious student who was working through his grief while maintaining his studies and relationship. That night out was meant to be a break from the weight of loss and the demands of medical school. Security cameras captured Brian entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona around 9 p.m. The bar was located on the second floor of a building, accessible primarily through a single entrance with an escalator. This detail would later become crucial to understanding the impossibility of what happened next. Multiple cameras covered the main entrance, and footage showed Brian talking with friends, ordering drinks, and appearing to enjoy his evening. At approximately 1:55 a.m., surveillance footage captured Brian talking with two women near the bar's entrance. He was seen speaking with them briefly before the camera shows him turning and walking back toward the bar area. That would be the last confirmed sighting of Brian Schaffer. He was never seen leaving the establishment on any camera, despite extensive footage review. When Brian's friend Clint realized he couldn't find him, he initially assumed Brian had left with someone or gone home without saying goodbye. It wasn't until the next day, when Brian failed to meet his girlfriend Alexis as planned and didn't answer repeated calls, that real concern set in. Alexis later described his voicemail greeting as one of the best sounds I have ever heard, a recording she would listen to repeatedly in the years that followed, holding on to the sound of his voice. The investigation revealed what seemed impossible. Brian had entered a bar with effectively one monitored exit and had never been captured leaving on camera. Investigators reviewed every second of footage from multiple angles. They accounted for nearly everyone who entered and exited that night. Brian Schaffer simply wasn't among those who left, yet he wasn't in the building either. Columbus police considered several theories. One focused on a construction area in the building that might have provided an alternative exit not covered by cameras. During the time of Brian's disappearance, construction work was being done on the building, potentially creating temporary exits or access points that wouldn't normally exist. However, extensive searches of the construction areas and the building itself revealed no trace of Brian. Another theory suggested Brian might have exited the bar by blending in with a large group, somehow avoiding camera detection in the brief moments when multiple people moved through the frame simultaneously. But careful analysis of the footage made this seem unlikely, as investigators could account for individuals even in crowded frames. The investigation took an unexpected turn when attention focused on Clint Florence, Brian's friend from that evening. Clint refused to take a polygraph test and hired an attorney, actions that sparked speculation about what he might know. Brian's brother Derek stated publicly, "He definitely knows something," expressing the family's frustration that Clint wouldn't cooperate more fully with the investigation. However, police have never named Clint as a suspect, and he has maintained he doesn't know what happened to Brian after they separated at the bar. Some investigators theorized that Brian, grieving his mother and stressed about his future, might have voluntarily disappeared to start a new life. Rumors circulated about a possible sighting in Mexico, though these were never confirmed despite investigation. The theory seemed inconsistent with Brian's character and plans. He had a trip planned with his girlfriend, was succeeding in medical school, and had made no preparations that would suggest planned disappearance. Brian's father, Randy Schaffer, described his son as exhausted from the pressures of medical school and grief, but not someone who would abandon his life. Randy passed away in 2008 without learning what happened to his son, taking his own heartbreak and unanswered questions to his grave. The strangest aspect remains the surveillance footage itself. In an era where cameras are everywhere, how does someone enter a building with one primary exit, all covered by multiple cameras, and never appear leaving? Investigators have acknowledged they cannot explain it. In 2021, an age-progressed photo was released showing what Brian might look like after 15 years, though few believe he voluntarily left his life behind. Nearly 2 decades later, the case remains one of the most analyzed disappearances due to the paradox of the surveillance footage. True crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators continue to scrutinize every frame of video, propose theories about hidden exits or camera blind spots, and debate what could have happened during those hours after 1:55 a.m. when Brian Schaffer walked away from the bar's entrance and vanished. But not all mysteries involve high-tech surveillance or modern investigative tools. Amy Mihaljevic. October 27, 1989, was an ordinary Friday afternoon in Bay Village, Ohio, a quiet suburban community where children rode bikes, played outside, and parents felt their neighborhoods were safe. 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic was an outgoing student who loved horses and had close relationships with her siblings. That afternoon, she would become the victim of a carefully planned abduction that would shock the community and remain unsolved for over 3 decades. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Amy had received phone calls at home from someone claiming to be associated with her mother's workplace. The caller told Amy he wanted to surprise her mother with a promotion and asked if Amy would help him shop for a gift. These phone calls were carefully constructed to gain Amy's trust, using specific information about her mother's employment to seem legitimate and convince a young girl that speaking with this stranger was not only safe but helpful. On that Friday afternoon, Amy told friends at school that she was going to meet someone at the Bay Square shopping center to buy a gift for her mother. Witnesses saw her leave the school and later reported seeing her at the shopping center with an unidentified man. She was abducted from the shopping center in what appeared to be a voluntary departure with someone she believed she could trust, a stranger who had groomed her through phone conversations to accept his presence. When Amy didn't return home that evening, her family immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. Amy was responsible and would never stay out without permission or fail to call. The shopping center was contacted, witnesses were sought, and a desperate search began for the young girl who had been lured away by carefully constructed lies. On February 8, 1990, more than 3 months after her disappearance, Amy's body was discovered in a field in Ashland County, about 50 miles from Bay Village. She had been struck in the head with a blunt object and passed from the injuries. The discovery confirmed the family's worst fears and transformed the case from a missing child investigation to a homicide that would demand justice. Forensic evidence collected from Amy's body and clothing included fibers and hairs that didn't match Amy or her family. These pieces of evidence, carefully preserved over the decades, would become crucial as DNA technology advanced. The fibers suggested Amy had been held somewhere before being transported to the location where her body was found, possibly a location with distinctive carpeting or fabric that might someday be matched to a suspect. Investigators discovered that Amy hadn't been the only young girl to receive strange phone calls during that period. Several other girls in the area reported receiving similar calls, with callers using the same script about shopping for gifts related to their mother's workplaces. This pattern suggested a predator who was systematically calling families, using publicly available information to make his approach seem legitimate, and waiting for a victim who would trust him enough to meet in person. The calls were eventually traced back to a logbook at a nature center where families had signed in with their names, addresses, phone numbers, and employers. The killer had apparently used this public logbook to identify potential victims and gather the information needed to make his calls seem authentic. This discovery led investigators to focus on people who had access to the nature center, but the pool of potential suspects remained discouragingly large. In 2021, investigators identified a person of interest in the case. A man whose former girlfriend reported his suspicious absence during the time of Amy's disappearance drew renewed attention when his behaviors and timeline aligned with aspects of the case. He failed a polygraph test and matched general descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen Amy with an unidentified man. However, passing or failing a polygraph isn't conclusive evidence, and investigators needed more to build a prosecutable case. Bay Village Police Department investigator Phil Torsney has remained dedicated to the case for years, stating publicly, "We will catch Amy Mihaljevich's killer," expressing the department's commitment to solving the case no matter how many years pass. His dedication reflects the profound impact Amy's case has had on the investigators who have worked it over the decades. In 2025, DNA testing on hair evidence found on Amy's body entered a new phase, with advanced laboratory techniques being applied to genetic material that couldn't be fully analyzed in earlier years. These tests offer perhaps the best hope of identifying Amy's killer through genetic genealogy, the same technique that has solved numerous cold cases in recent years by matching DNA to family members in genealogical databases. Amy's mother, Margaret, has spoken over the years about her daughter's trusting nature, a quality that made Amy vulnerable to someone who exploited that trust. "She was trusting," Margaret said simply, a statement that captures both what made Amy special and what made her susceptible to a predator's carefully constructed deception. A reward of $27,000 remains offered for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Amy's case. Her story has become a cautionary tale about stranger danger and the sophisticated methods predators use to gain children's trust, taught in schools across the country as an example of how innocent situations can hide dangerous intentions. 35 years after that October afternoon, Amy's family and investigators continue hoping that advancing DNA technology will finally provide the answers that have eluded them for over 3 decades. Sometimes the mysteries involve not one person, but several. Gary Mathias. February 24, 1978, began with excitement for 5 friends in Yuba County, California. Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Jackie Hewitt, Ted Weiher, and William Sterling were heading to Chico to watch a college basketball game, looking forward to an evening of entertainment. 4 of the men had intellectual challenges, while Mathias, at 25, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia after serving in the Army. But on his medication, he was stable and functioning well, according to family members. Gary Dale Mathias had a challenging path before joining the Army in the 1970s. He had been hospitalized as a teenager after experiencing psychological difficulties, but military structure had seemed to help him. When drug problems developed during his service and led to his schizophrenia diagnosis, he was discharged but had stabilized on medication by 1978. His family described him as athletic and gentle when properly medicated, someone who had found ways to manage his condition and live a relatively normal life. The 5 friends made it to the basketball game without incident, enjoying the evening and planning to return home afterward. But they never arrived. When the men didn't return that night, families filed missing persons reports, initiating a search that would uncover one of the most bizarre and troubling mysteries in California history. Their car, Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego, was discovered on February 25th, abandoned on a mountain road near Plumas National Forest, miles off any reasonable route home from Chico. The vehicle was in good working condition with a quarter tank of gas, but it had been left in deep snow in an area where it had no reason to be. The car was unlocked and the keys were missing, as if someone had deliberately parked it there and walked away. Searchers combed the area immediately after the car was found, but the winter conditions and remote terrain made the search difficult. Months passed with no trace of the missing men, their families holding on to hope while fearing the worst. Then, in June 1978, as the snow finally melted, the bodies of 4 of the 5 men were discovered. The discoveries raised more questions than answers. Ted Weiher's body was found in a Forest Service trailer about 19 miles from where the car had been abandoned. The trailer had been stocked with supplies including food, mattresses, and blankets, yet most of these provisions remained unused. Weiher had apparently survived for weeks in the trailer, slowly starving despite the available food, before finally succumbing to hypothermia and starvation. His mother later said that ignoring someone's pleas for help was not like her son, suggesting he may have been confused or unable to properly utilize the resources around him. The bodies of Jack Madruga, Jackie Hewitt, and William Sterling were found outside, scattered across the forest. They had apparently passed from exposure to the elements, unable to find shelter or help. Autopsies revealed they had died of hypothermia and starvation, despite being in an area where survival should have been possible for experienced outdoorsmen. though none of the men had significant wilderness experience. Gary Mathias was never found. A pair of shoes discovered near one of the bodies were identified as belonging to Mathias, suggesting he had survived longer than the others and may have tried to help them or seek assistance. Some investigators theorized that Mathias, being more capable than his companions due to his military experience, had possibly walked out seeking help but perished somewhere else in the vast forest. Others wondered if his schizophrenia, especially if he had missed medications, had contributed to confused decision-making that led the group into danger. A witness reported seeing a group matching their description in a pickup truck in the area, and another reported hearing voices near where the bodies were later found. However, these potential sightings were never confirmed, and no one ever came forward to explain how the men ended up so far off course or why they left their vehicle. The mystery deepens when considering that the group had no reason to be in that area. They had successfully made it to the basketball game and should have simply retraced their route home. What caused them to drive dozens of miles in the wrong direction, up a mountain road in winter conditions, and then abandon a working vehicle to walk into the wilderness? Some theories suggest they may have been chased or threatened by someone, causing them to flee into unfamiliar territory. Others propose that Gary Mathias, if he had missed his medication, might have experienced a psychiatric episode that led him to convince the others to follow him into the mountains. But none of these theories fully explain the careful positioning of the abandoned car, or why the group stayed together rather than seeking help separately. Families continue to plead for re-evaluation of the case, hoping that new investigative techniques or a fresh look at the evidence might finally explain what happened to the 5 friends who went to a basketball game and never came home. Nearly 50 years later, Gary Mathias remains missing, and the questions about what led 5 men into a snowy forest to their doom remains unanswered. But some cases combine mystery with clear evidence of intentional harm. Tammy Zawitsky. August 23, 1992, started as a routine drive for 21-year-old Tammy Jo Zawicki, a talented photographer and soccer player heading back to Grinnell College in Iowa after visiting family. The drive along Interstate 80 through Illinois should have been unremarkable. Thousands of miles of highway traveled safely by millions each year. But somewhere along that route, Tammy's journey was interrupted in a way that would lead to her passing and launch an investigation that continues over 3 decades later. Tammy had grown up in Pleasant Hill, Pennsylvania, but her family had moved to Greenville, South Carolina during her teenage years. She was majoring in art and Spanish at Grinnell, known among her friends and professors as creative and athletic, someone who captured the world through her camera lens and competed fiercely on the soccer field. As she drove back for her senior year, she carried camera equipment and personal items that would later become crucial to the investigation. On August 23rd, motorists reported seeing Tammy's vehicle on the side of Interstate 80 near LaSalle, Illinois, apparently experiencing car trouble. The vehicle was later found abandoned at a rest stop, with Tammy missing. The circumstances suggested she had either accepted help from someone or had been forced from her vehicle, though the scene provided few immediate clues about which scenario had occurred. 9 days later, on September 1st, Tammy's body was discovered in rural Missouri, approximately 500 miles from where her car had been found. She had been stabbed 8 times and had been the victim of assault. The condition of her body and the location suggested she had been held captive for a period before being killed and dumped in the remote area. Several of Tammy's personal items were missing from the scene and have never been recovered. Her camera, which had been with her during the trip, was gone, a particularly significant loss given her passion for photography and the possibility that it might have contained images of her attacker. Also missing was a distinctive musical watch that her family had given her, an item they hoped might someday surface and provide a lead. Investigators developed a suspect description based on witness reports from the interstate and rest area. A white male, 35 to 40 years old, over 6 feet tall with bushy hair, seen near a tractor trailer. This description led to intense focus on truck drivers who regularly traveled Interstate 80, as the circumstances suggested someone with knowledge of the highways and remote areas might have been responsible. One suspect who drew significant attention was Bruce Mendenhall, a truck driver later convicted of another woman's passing. Investigators examined whether he might have been responsible for Tammy's case as well, but they were never able to conclusively link him to her passing. Another potential suspect, Larry Dwayne Hall, was investigated after being connected to other cases, but again, no definitive evidence emerged. DNA evidence was collected from Tammy's body and the crime scene, but in 1992, DNA analysis was still relatively primitive compared to current techniques. In 2017, forensic experts began retesting the evidence using modern methods, hoping that advances in genetic analysis might finally identify her killer. These retesting efforts have continued into 2025, with investigators hopeful that genetic genealogy might provide the breakthrough that traditional investigation couldn't. Tammy's brother has spoken over the years about his sister's vibrant personality, saying she was full of life, a description that underscores the tragedy of her life being cut short just as she was entering her final year of college. He has remained active in keeping her case in the public eye, regularly speaking with media and supporting investigative efforts. The case has connections to a broader pattern of violence along America's interstate highways. Investigators have examined whether Tammy's passing might be linked to other unsolved cases involving women who disappeared from or were found near interstate highways, particularly in the Midwest. Some researchers believe a serial offender targeting women along trucking routes might be responsible for multiple cases, though proving such connections has been difficult. A reward of $50,000 has been offered for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Tammy's case, reflecting the seriousness with which authorities continue to pursue justice. In 2025, hope persists that DNA advances will finally provide answers, allowing Tammy's family to finally know who took their daughter and sister away from them on that August day. 33 years after Tammy Zawicki set out for her senior year of college, her killer remains unidentified. But investigators haven't given up, and advancing forensic technology offers the possibility that evidence preserved for decades might finally reveal the truth about what happened along Interstate 80 that summer day in 1992. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video